So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. Yeah, you wanted to see this, Steven. My talk is basically called "My Team is New to Drupal and What Should I Know?" And to give you a little bit of an idea, I'm a technical account manager for Acquia since 2015. Been working with Drupal since 2012, and we've been involved to the Drupal community. And the particular fact about me is I love Taekwondo. As a TAM for various customers, I've discovered that when you have a Drupal project, there are so many concepts that you need to eventually know. You don't need to know them all at the beginning or in depth, but they will come out in your project. DevOps, stuff that you will be facing at some point. And I discovered that if we know ahead of time those, now my customers will come to me like, I think it's time for me to start thinking about whatever. So the idea is to create like a body of knowledge of everything that you should know. It's not comprehensive. We're not going to deep into any of the concepts. I just want to put them in your mind. So whenever you're working on your project and you feel like my site is getting slow, you already know, okay, these are the things that they can help me with that part, if that makes sense. So let's start. So the main goal of the presentation is, the concept that you have to have on your radar to create your workflow and eventually strive for it. So you don't need to do it right now, but keep it in your mind for whenever you need it. It's something that you have to have when you have your ideal workflow and project. I use a black box approach a lot, and for me, a black box means like I'm usually a front ender. So when I started with front end, I went to the CSS part, and I knew there were preprocessed functions. I put them in a black box. I didn't even see them till what I could do on templates and CSS was not enough, and had to add something different. Then I opened the black box, understood preprocessed functions better, and used them. So use that approach. If a concept is too much or you're not understanding, just know that exists. That's the idea. And it's something that you can plan for today, whatever the state of your project in Drupal is, and prepare for whatever comes in the future. So the idea of this is just to understand the best practices that we usually use in Drupal. Drupal is very interesting as an open source project because of that. I've been with open source since 1996, and I was curious when I started with Drupal in how much we love best practices. It's so in the DNA of the community that sometimes if you talk about, I don't use version control for my code, you get like, whoop, raise eyebrows, like, why? And stuff like that. And it's for you to plan for your reality. Most of these concepts may not apply to your team, but eventually. And scale up as you need it, so you can head in the right direction when you're growing on your project. And of course, to have a common ground so everybody kind of is talking about the same. So we're going to talk about several big topics, and I'm going to go super fast. We can have questions at the end or in the middle. I don't really care. How to create your workflow. How to, a little bit of Git concepts and version control. We're going to talk about basic stuff on Drupal development, sysadmin and servers, so you know what is in best practices on that. DevOps, design guiding principles. That is not about just graphical design, so you know what to start thinking about when you're designing your whole application. Project management and Agile, governance, team composition, and why the Drupal community is important. So let's go. So creating your workflow. The main thing when you create a workflow for your project is think about what works best for you. I said at the beginning we love Taekwondo, and the best example I can find for that is when we started doing sparring, our instructor, he will always tell me, or all of us, is like, everybody's going to tell you what to do. Try it. See if it works for your body, your style of fight, your speed, your age. If it works, use it. If it's not, it's trash. Throw it away, but always listen. Same deal with how you work in a Drupal project. Everybody's going to tell you how they do it. And there are so many ways to do it. See what works for your team. If somebody tells you that you need to have a workflow with a deep DevOps workflow, and you don't have anybody that knows DevOps, probably you should not develop that part of your workflow for your project right now, because it won't work. I hope that makes sense. Document everything that you are doing, how to start a project, how do you develop locally, everything that is part of your workflow on your project, how you deploy to production, how you deploy to staging, are you deploying to staging, are you using Drupal 8, Drupal 7, are you using a Drupal VM, everything should be documented so a new person can come and just follow that and start working right away, or know what has to happen. But remember, the documentation is a living organism. Today, I'm from Acquia, so we have Acquia Dev Desktop, which is a really simple tool that you open and you have the whole LAMP stack. Today, and with some of my customers, we started with that. At some point, we need to move to a composer base with a virtual box style of workflow. So we can change the documentation. We can change the workflow whenever you need it, whenever you grow. So it's alive. Always strive to have a better workflow. And the way to do it, what we have found out with other times, is capture what you have right now, document how you work right now, and then kind of do a detail of where you want to be, and start picking one bad habit at a time. Don't try to fix everything. Pick one, fix it, and you can keep improving your work documentation and your workflow. So one of the first things that you need to know when you're working with Drupal is about Git. I guess everybody knows what Git is, right? Version control? Yes? Good. What you need to know, what for me is important that you understand, is how Drupal works, because it's a very particular workflow, and what workflows are available for you to work with your developers and the people that is in your team. And it's important also to know about branching strategies. How do you create your branches? And always make sure that whatever you do, there is code ownership. Somebody is responsible for the code that goes into production. So for Drupal, how it works is Drupal works in a workflow that means trust no one. So very quick is only official people that can commit. So it's called the committers, and it's a small team of contributors that have earned the respect of the community, and they were named official committers. Only maintainers can do for modules. Basically what happens is, if there is a problem, we create an issue in the issue track. That issue track gets whatever noise it needs to get. Eventually, somebody is going to fix it, providing a patch. When somebody provides a patch, that issue goes into needs review, which means we need people to go apply the patch and make sure and come back and say, hey, yeah, actually fixed it. When people does that, moves into the next step, that is RTBC, or ready to be committed. That means there is a fix for that, whatever problem is reported, and it can go into code or into the module. And when that happens, is only when it gets back to the main repository. So graphically, this is Drupal. You can copy it locally, work, do whatever you want to do, fixing that issue. When you're happy or you believe you have a solution, you submit a patch for review, people reviews that patch, and then once it's accepted, a committer will go through that issue, review it, and that's the code ownership. He is the owner at that moment and will say, yeah, that looks good, or, well, yeah, this fixed the issue, but the code is terrible, or it's missing standards, you can go back. And that's how something gets into core or a module. For your project, you have two more basically standard ways to do it. One is trust the process. If I have a repository where my project exists, and everybody can download, change, work on their computers, and push changes, right? I'm trusting the process. There is something that says you cannot just push a change. You have to ask the team lead to review your code, or you put it in a branch, and you create a process that avoids two people working on the same place at the same time and creating a merging conflict that basically is going to break your project. Okay? So everybody has the same access, and it's the process that determines the integrity of your code. You can use the protected code way, which is, anybody have heard of pull request? Yeah, the worst name ever. Pull request, they're being renamed merge request. And how it works is you have your main repository. If you want to work, you used to need a fork, and I didn't change this because I forgot, but now with GitHub, you don't need to do a fork. You can do it from a branch. So you create your own branch, which is kind of alternate universe is what Eric, one of my customers, use. That's a branch. It's like an alternate universe, kind of in the comics. It's a different version of your project. You work on your own branch, your own version of the project, and once you're done with whatever you're doing, a new user story, a new ticket, a new feature, whatever you're doing, fixing a bug, you push it back to your fork or branch, and then you create what is called, used to be called a pull request. And it's bad name because a pull request is asking this guy to pull from me. I'm asking the other project to pull. Now it's called a merge request, or it's being called a merge request, which means merge my changes. That goes into a special interface in your repository, and you can configure that to have people, it cannot go if a supervisor doesn't approve it, or something like that. So there's your code ownership. Somebody has to double check your code. It's very good because allows for code ownership and review, uses the merge request, and forks are not needed. So this is the usual one when you have a big team, or when you have a team and partners working on the same project, or when you eventually have your own local team, but you know somebody's going to develop functionality and it's another department that happens to have money and is going to go hire a partner. This is the way to work to protect your code. What's the end goal? That your production environment never goes with the white screen of death. The next thing that you have to know when you're working with Git repositories is branching strategies. There are several strategies. The one that we recommend the most, especially in Acquia and in general, is what is called branch per feature. So does everybody use a ticket system for their project? Like a Jira or user stories? We'll talk about that in a future. You should have, like, I'm developing personas or human beings. I'm developing houses, and I'm going to put those people in the houses. So I create tickets, and today I'm working on adding a new person. Okay? So that's one set of work that you're working. So the idea is you create a branch per each one of those tasks that you're doing, or user stories. You work during your sprint, you work during the time that you decided, 1 month, 2 months, whatever is going to be your sprint. And when you're happy, or when you, at the end, we ask the developer, hey, are you done? Yes. Are you done? Yes. Okay. Everything comes together into a QA branch. Tested, goes to QA, everybody looks around, yeah, that's what has to do, it works, no errors, I'm happy, then it's released into master. And that's kind of a really, really oversimplified way to do it. What is important is have a branch strategy. Know how you protect your code from a developer that is having a bad day and forgo a semicolon and is breaking the whole code. Some Drupal development basics. There is Drush and Drupal console. These are tools that will help you execute remotely some commands that you need to execute sometimes in a Drupal project. Enable a module, disable a module, update. There are several tasks that they can do. If you are using feeds, they can run feeds. Drupal console also allows you to create boilerplate code. So if you're doing Drupal 8 and you want to create, I need to create a plugin or a service, and I have no clue what files do I need, Drupal console creates that boilerplate for you, and you just have to add your code. So use those tools when eventually. Have a config and data strategy. Basically, since Drupal 8, we introduced CMI, configuration management, right? So how it was in the past is content, my pages, my nodes are in the database. There's nothing I can do about that. But if I have 4 fields in my node and I wanted to add a 5th field, in the past I did it in the database. There was no control about it. How I ensure that everybody has that extra field? The features module came out, and the idea is to take those configurations down to code, so it can be in the Git repository, can be version control. You can go back, you can find out who added the field, when was it added, fix it, improve it, etc. So configuration management, basically what it does is puts your configuration on a YAML file, which is a special format. And it just puts everything, what modules are enabled or not. And it says, in production, all these modules are enabled. All these modules should be disabled. And you put it in your code. So there are strategies around in the net. The most common use right now is a configuration split, I believe it's called. So whenever you get there, start thinking, how do I save the changes I do on my website configuration? And I should have a plan on how that configuration goes, because a good example is if I'm developing locally, there is a set of modules or configurations that I should have on. On front end, the team debug that shows me in Chrome DevOps what template is being rendered, what variables or when is a template rendered, when it finished, etc. That helps me develop. You don't want that in production. So a configuration strategy allows you to avoid having modules or having configuration in production that should only exist in devs and etc. It's really important. Again, remember, not going deep in anything because we have a bunch more to cover. So one of the things when you're thinking on a configuration strategy, have a canonical source of configuration. Is it going to be development or is it going to be production? Who is the actual latest, stable, real configuration of your site? If I'm confused, I don't know what is my set of modules. At some point in my code, I have 5 different configurations. And I need to know, or I have 5 different servers, have 2 developers that have different configurations in their computer. I have a dev server that has a configuration, I have a production server that has another configuration. Which one of those is the canonical source? Which is the official one? And go from there. That should be in your plan, because it's the only way to always know he was playing with configuration, this is the actual configuration. Or go back to the beginning, to production. Usually it's production. Some people use development because they are moving forward super fast with their project and releasing new features all the time. So for some projects, dev should be the canonical. If you're in a stable project and you're just adding or fixing stuff or slowly adding new stuff, probably production, and usually it's the case, production is your canonical source. Start thinking about how to debug your code. That means start thinking about having an IDE, a graphic interface for your code, not just a notepad. And use Xdebug, which basically is a tool from PHP that allows you to go line by line on your code and see what's executing, see what is in the memory, what variables are at that time, and identify what is happening. And of course, no PHP basics, because it's Drupal, and even if you're a site builder, eventually you're going to have to do some PHP. Best practices on the back end follow code standards. Make sure everybody is in your process. Use code standards. Those code standards are in Drupal.org. You can read them. If you are using tools to develop, like PHP Storm, it's embedded on that, so it corrects whatever you're writing. And it's stuff like, don't use indentation, use two spaces to indent something, stuff like that. Document your code. Document your code. Document your code.
Should we document our code?
You should. Because sometimes you go back to that, and you are so sure you're going to remember what you did on those 3 lines of code. It's a very simple freaking PHP line, and you're going to remember. You don't. Or you're not there to fix it. Somebody else has to fix it. And where did he assign this to that variable? Well, make sure you have that documentation well done. Yes?
I was going to ask you about resources for code standards, both
Drupal.org.
And both PHP 7 and Drupal 8. Like what besides Drupal.org? Like what is there?
Each project has their own Drupal code standards. What is important is there are documentation on how to use it, and there are tools like Code Sniffer.
And there's like a PHP Storm configuration.
PHP Storm has configuration for Drupal, but every project has their own. We like 2 spaces. There are projects that like tabs for indentation, for example. So, but using code standards is easier, makes easier for anybody to read your code, even for yourself. Because one day you're happy coding, the next day, 10 years later, 10 months, 10 weeks later, you're not going to remember what you were doing. So it's a very well established, standardized code. It's easier to really understand what you're doing. If you're doing backend, or eventually you have to start creating your own custom modules, the main thing that you have to start remembering is the difference between plugins and services, which is the huge new thing in Drupal. So I will let you to find out about that, but services is something that does something, like managing entities or nodes or content types. That's a service in Drupal. Plugins is something like managing multiple configurations for the same thing. In the past, we used these sliders, if you remember in Drupal 7, if you have any experience, and you could have like different configurations for that slider. That'd be a plugin, sort of an idea. A good example nowadays, layouts. Those are plugins, different layouts, and you will have tomorrow a talk about layout builder. That's used for a plugin. And the front end, you can tell I'm a front ender because I have more on that. On the front end is what, if your project is new, is where you're going to spend more of your time. If you have a new project, probably you don't have a backend, you're just site building, but the team, that one you have to develop. You're not going to find, but you find them, but they're not really good. You're not going to find a team that you just plug in and go. You have to develop your own graphical presence, right? So uses Max, which is basically a standard on how to organize your files using Sass, which is a preprocess for CSS. It's like a language that creates CSS that allows you to reutilize stuff. So the main goal of Sass is like the background color of my website. Today I said it's blue, and I put it in my CSS everywhere. And one day I decide it's red. How do I change that without changing something that needs to be blue still? So I cannot go through my CSS and replace blue with red, because I will mess up everything. In Sass, you can have a variable that is called background. You just use the variable, and if you need to change the background, go change the variable, recompile your CSS. That should happen every time you deploy, and you have the changes. Okay? Smax is you can divide the CSS in parts. Like you have all CSS that is layout, width, height, boxes, etc. You have another part that is main HTML components. How your H1 looks, how your H2 looks, how your image looks, how your P is styled, and then you have one per each component if you want to. You know, like my pager, how's that style. So it's a way to organize it in files. So again, if you're coming back to fix something, it's easier to find where it is. At some point, you need to start thinking about class naming strategies. You have a huge amount of HTML that is going to be produced by Drupal. And if you have a strategy, one of those is BEM, that I can never remember what it stands for, but it's one of the strategies, and it's the last one is modifier. I have a button, so all my buttons are called button, but I have the panic button. So that one should be called button__panic. So when I see that class, I know what I'm talking about. Yes, sir?
Block element modifier.
Block element modifier. One day I'm going to learn that. Or remember. Make sure the presentation logic is in the right place. Presentation logic should be in the template or in a preprocessed function. Okay? And also that the presentation logic should not be in a backend module. A module should not be telling you this is an H1 or an H2. The template should do that, because eventually, today you need it as an H1, tomorrow you don't. Tomorrow that's not the main title. That's not what you want Google to read, to use whatever example. So presentation logic should be in the right place. In the past, I've seen a lot of custom modules where the module is giving the HTML. So imagine that if you have to change that and make it look better. Either your front end knows a lot of PHP or your backend has to make design decisions. Neither of those work pretty good, usually. Learn tweak, because it's the thing in Drupal 8. Remember that stable and classy exist, so it's basically a definition that there is in Drupal 8. Every theme has a base theme from these two core themes, stable and classy. What happened is, the day of that picture was taken, a decision was made based on a survey that said, but that was in Austin, by the way, that was here. There are front-enders that want to put all their class names, all their HTML, they want to create their own thing and work from there. There are others that want to be provided with a very specific class that lets me know this is a field, has multiple values, and it's an image, for example. So they want Drupal to provide that. Stable will provide the basic templates for your site and on your theme, so it works and administration works. Classy will provide more HTML with classes that explain what's coming. It's a view, it's a node, it's a field, what conditions are there. You can infer as much as possible from the classes. So every theme in Drupal depends on one of those. And if you have a sub-theme of a Zen theme or whatever you downloaded from Drupal, the base theme that you're using has to depend on stable or classy. And it's important to know who's providing the classes. Learning about pattern lab. If you are developing a project, you have your own graphic image, your own identity, graphical identity. Pattern Lab is the best tool to actually develop one of those using Atomic Design. So on the servers, what you eventually are going to hear, if you are in a GoDaddy hosting, probably you don't have any of this, but as your project grows, you're going to hear people talking about stuff like this. So, varnish or reverse proxy, that means a layer of caching that will be in front of your server. What it does is, Drupal is dynamic, right? It's PHP that produces HTML. You don't want your server producing the HTML somebody goes to your front page. Especially if you have not changed your front page in the last 2 years or the last 2 months, right? Varnish, what it does is, I ask Varnish, show me the home page. Varnish goes to Drupal and say, hey dude, I need the home page. For how long is this valid? 6 days, 10 days, a year. Okay. Takes an HTML picture, save it, and the next time somebody goes for the home page, Varnish says, I have a copy. It's valid. I'll give you this HTML. So your web server is not doing all the PHP processing and stuff to create the home page. It's presenting a picture and it's faster. Okay? Every big Pantheon, IO, Acquia, all of them will provide you with a varnish layer. Yes?
I was just going to comment. I actually worked with a similar content management system, except we used the XSLT.
Yeah.
So we do install the XML, so the output would be, a new HTML page, which is really useful for like recursive items, that type of thing.
Exactly. So when you're reusing, this helps with performance. Eventually, you're going to be listening about Memcache and Redis. Your Drupal uses databases. Everything is stored in there, and they are complex, really complex. If you have a node and that node has revisions because you want to go back if you made a mess or run change, that involves 5 tables only to load the node or to save the node or to update the node or to delete the node, etc. Right? So make sure eventually your project is going to need Memcache or Redis, which is basically DB caching, which is moving tasks of the database into memory instead of hard drive. And we all know memory is faster than hard drive. Eventually you need a multi-tier server structure. So if you're looking, and it's also good if you're looking for a new hosting partner. These are the options that are important to you. Multi-tier means it's not one server doing everything. Is I have load balancers that are taking that picture using Varnish. I have web servers. Eventually I may have database servers in a different server. And even my file system can be in a different server. How many levels of that multi-tier depends on your project. If you get 100 hits a month, probably you can do it in one server. If you're getting 1 million, just the web server can die doing database for one request. So you want to separate them. Start thinking from the beginning on monitoring and log analysis tools. Some names, New Relic. New Relic is the best. It's not cheap, but when something is going wrong with your site, New Relic can give you a lot of detail up to the point to identify if it's something in your code, is something on your server, or something at the browser level. A typical example of a performance problem is I wanted to do something with JavaScript. I added a little library, and that library decided that it's going to read the whole DOM every time something refreshes. So that takes 10 seconds, and that's why your customers are reporting, your site is slow. So New Relic helps you with that. Sumo Logic is a tool to query your logs and try to find errors and problems. Signal Effects is another one that shows you how your servers are doing from the logs, how the CPU, how the file system, etc. The idea is always keep an eye on performance of wherever you're hosting your server. At all levels of the stack, that will help you know when you have to move to a bigger house. Your site is not being able to handle it. Helps a lot debugging issues. My site is down, I don't have any errors in the code, but my site is not loading. Why? These tools will help you realize if, oh, Apache died, or you didn't upgrade Apache, the web server. And also helps you to identify possible improvements. CPU is going high. If you have the right tools, you can know who's eating the CPU, and then you can realize, oops, shouldn't have done that in this module. I have to change it and improve that. Or I need to break my server, web server and database. They need to be apart because they're killing each other. Stuff like that. Eventually, start thinking about containers. It's the new big thing on servers. So eventually, you're going to listen to people talking about Docker and containers a lot. So I just put that because it's going to come your way. DevOps. DevOps is, I have a workflow on how my code goes from I type it and it goes to production. You also need on how, after I type it, how it goes from my computer to the server and how I test it. So that's basically DevOps. DevOps is start thinking that eventually you're going to talk about Drupal has some inherent But if you're developing your modules, you're going to have eventually, automated test. You have two options, Behat and PHP unit. The difference is behavioral and functional. In a pretty easy way, behavioral, Behat allows you to test. If I have an user and password box for login, right? If I put the wrong login, I should get a message that says wrong. That's a Behat test, and you can do it with code, with Behat. A PHP unit type of test is I have a function that receives two numbers and add them. So the test will be pass 2 and 2, and I should get a 4. That's a functional test. Also, eventually, you're going to start thinking on front end on graphical regression test. These tests are basically tools that are there, about 5 or 6 of them, very common in Drupal. You can find them. They take a picture of the main pages of your website, a JPG, and whenever you do a change or whenever you deploy new code, they go and take that picture again of the same URLs, overimpose them one over the other, and shows you the changes. They kind of highlight on red what changed. So let's say you're changing the size of the main title. You want the H1 on the main home page to be 45 pixels because it's the main page and I want my name big over there. You do the change, a graphical review test can show you that the way you did the CSS in a page that is down there that you never go, the H1 also changed to 41 pixels or 42 or whatever number. You didn't want that. So it's a way to identify if something else changes that you were not intending to change on a front-end change. Also something that you're going to need at some point is continuous integration. This is every time you accept code, right? We finish a sprint, I'm going to release a new version of my system. Initially, somebody has to push the code, deploy it in the web server, run the Drush update, and do a bunch of manual tasks. That is your deploy strategy, right? Continuous integrations, what it does is automatically tools like Travis, pipelines in Acquia, run the automated test, run every task that you have to run, compile your CSS, create your spreads for graphic images, whatever task that you run manually, they detect, new pull request was affected. Let's do all of this and put it into this. So it will help eventually because when your project starts growing and you have more than 2 or 3 or 4 developers developing at the same time and pull requests are going in, you don't want a person just going through all the steps and pushing, with the new change. You want an automatic system. Have a strategy for local development. Using Drupal VM, there is a tool from Acquia that's called Acquia BLT which goal is to make automatic as much task as we can. So it's basically a tool that you can run BLT VM and it configures your VM, compiles everything that it needs to be compiled, download from Composer your Drupal, creates your Drupal, loads the Drupal VM, and you just go to a local URL and start looking at your website and develop. Acquia Dev Desktop is another one, whatever works for you. If you have a small team, when we started with Texas HHS, that's what we did because it was a small team and an easy way to develop. We're moving into a more advanced workflow now. When you are designing your app, stuff that you have to keep in your mind when you're doing it. Always mobile first. Not everybody that says that is doing mobile first is doing it. That's not true. Mobile first, if you know any CSS, is basically if I have a button and I want the font size to be 12 pixels in mobile and 15 in the rest, the default one, it will be button, font size 12, and a media query immediately that says, if I am something bigger than mobile, font size is 15. That's how mobile first should work. The default style should be mobile. Same goes for layouts, of course, and everything that needs to be look good in a cell phone. Start thinking about atomic design. Atomic design ties up back to Pattern Lab, where they have atoms. So an atom is a label. So I design the label, so all my labels should look the same in my whole site because it's a graphic identity, right? All my H1 should look the same. Then I can have, or all my text boxes should look the same. Then I have a molecule, which is an input box, which has a label and a box. And that's my next level. Then I have the next level, which is a contact form, which is going to have a bunch of those. And that's kind of the idea of atomic design. Start thinking about that. What is beautiful about it is like you change the font of all your labels, right? You just change the atom label and everything gets updated. That's what Pattern Labs allows you to have. And there are some Drupal teams that tied up to Pattern Lab. I recommend everybody to use a proven grid or a CSS framework. I know we have Flex Grid now on all the browsers pretty much. Modern browsers use the Flex Grid, but having a grid that can make decisions on what happened when I'm looking my site on this screen or that screen or on a cell phone, there is a lot of stuff that you have to take into account. So I'd rather have somebody like Bootstrap, like Salt Foundation, that already has been working on that for years and they have solved any little issue. So you can focus on make it look pretty, not making sure when the screen goes down 1 pixel, I change to the next media query. Use extend, some people like it, some people don't like it. It's something from SAS that basically, if I have a button, as an example, my button all have font X on 12 pixels, gray background. But I have the delete button. I probably want a different background, right? If I'm using classes, I'm not having 2 classes on my button, one that is button and another that is delete, because that really doesn't tell you anything. I have a class that is button delete. And I tell that to extend the button. So what it does when it compiles is you define the button class. In another class, button delete, you said add extend button. And when it's compiled, that definition of button will be button, comma, button underscore delete. The basic one, font X, font size 12, background gray. And then you will have, after that, your class that says button delete, change the background to red. And it will simplify your CSS. There is a lot of examples for this on the net. Every time that you develop or you create your app, have UX and DX in mind. UX we have heard of, right? User experience. Do we know what DX is?
For dogs?
That's developer experience. Whatever I'm developing has to be, I have to be able to give it to another, my brand new developer, and he should be able to just go and start the local development and start working. So also have DX in mind. If you are if you have one of those processes like, yes, no, you have to change this in the configuration so it works in a Windows. That's not a good DX experience. It should be documented or made automatic. Accessibility, big deal. Good news is Drupal 8 is very good with accessibility, but if your site needs, I know Texas HHS, all sites have to be accessible by law. So depending on the requirements, you will have to do it. And a little piece of advice, this is very specific, but we have found it happens a lot. Sometimes you need a little configuration. Best example, I'm reading a web service, right? So I need to know where that web service is located. I don't know, I'm connecting to a list of houses because I'm in a realtor site and I'm connecting to the HAR site and I have the URL for that web service. Some people hard code that URL in the code. The web server origin is this and they keep coding and they do everything to read it. What happens when that changes? You have to change your code. You have to go through all these approvals that you should have in place. When you have unique values on configuration, don't hard code it, provide a way to change it. It's extra work, create a form. It's pretty easy in Drupal where you say the backend for this module, the backend is this one. May not change ever, but eventually HAR goes from API 1.0 to 1.0 to 2.0, and you have to change it. Governance. You need to have governance in your project. You need to know how you are deploying to production. It's not that like, hey, copy the Drupal site to production. You have to have a strategy for that. It's only going to happen when we close this type of task. It's only going to happen when we have a hotfix, etc. Have to run. Chain of command, always make sure your changes get to the developers the right way. What you want to avoid there, and we'll talk about that, is the want versus need. The director that said, oh, I want the site to be sparkly, because I saw it in another one. And actually get how the user needs, the real user needs, gets to the developer in a positive way. Always get the, like, I cannot say no to the boss. Well, if you have a strategy, there is an easy way to say no. Of course we can do this. These are the resources we're going to need. This is what we have to stop developing. Do we go ahead? Yes or no? That's what it is. Have release strategies. How often what makes a new version of your site? What makes a hotfix of your site? Have a version strategy that reflects that release strategy. Like in Drupal now, 8, 8.1, 8.2. Those are minor versions. No, those are mid versions, and then you have 8.1.1 that is a fix. Have code ownership. Define code ownership. Usually it's the technical architect. Who decides what actually goes in production? Who decides it's good code, is well done, and is performant, and it looks good to go into production? From the project management, use Scrum or Kanban, use Agile. Don't use what is called wet Agile. I had a customer that told me, yeah, we have everything ready for Agile. Okay, can I have access to some of that? Yes, here is the Gantt graph with 22 sprints and detail on each sprint what was being done. That's not Agile. Of course, March, they were supposed to release the first release on April. March, partner came back, they needed more time. December. Use user personas. That the goal of user personas, if you research, you will find them, is to develop what your actual end user needs. Be aware of needs versus want. Do I need this in my site? Do my user need this? Or somebody wants that? I'm going to spend a lot of resources in something that he wanted it, but nobody's going to use it, or I focus those resources in something that my actual users, my bottom line, is actually going to use. Develop with user stories and make sure they're good user stories, small, specific, testable, all the characteristics. And make sure your sprint strategy goes hand in hand with your release strategy. Do I release every sprint? Do I release every 2 sprints? Have something defined. On the team composition, eventually, ideal, depending on your project, this is a be or become, because I have something there that has caused some loves in the past, and you'll see. You need a technical architect. At some point, you need somebody that oversees the technical implementation, and is usually the code owner. This is not necessarily a developer. This is the one that will tell you, oh, use this module, create an entity like this, we're going to tie it with a content type like this, etc. That's the kind of the work of a technical architect. Have a real project manager, somebody that knows Scrum, that knows how to handle the project, that is aware with everybody. Have a real front-ender, or become a real front-ender if you're the front-end. Somebody that actually knows about SMAX, standards, CSS. Front-end is not just CSS or changing something in the interface. There is so much more about front end. And nowadays, in all the projects that I have worked, servers respond under a second. The performance is on the browser. And when a site takes 7 seconds to respond, usually 6.5 of those seconds are on the browser and are mistakes on front end. Backend, eventually you're going to need a backend. Site building will take you just so long. Eventually you need something special. When that happens, be or become or find out a real backend developer. You need a product manager, somebody that knows what your site should be doing and how it will make you money, if that's the case, and tell you what actually needs to be done. Again, needs versus wants. Somebody that actually knows what your end users need. And make sure you have QA testing on your project before the end of the sprint, not after the sprint is done. And finally, make sure you're already doing that. Be in the community. It's always where we thrive in best practices, so if there is a best practices that is coming up or is changing, you will find it in these events. Somebody like me or better will be talking about it. I found out that involvement in the community is key for the professional development of any team that is doing Drupal. The team that I told you that asked time from March to December, a little bit of time, they have a fantastic developer, 10 years, never been involved in the community. And one of the problems is he was making so many mistakes that we talk about them in the community all the time. Don't do this. So bad habits happen in a developer community. Is a good place to find out the best way to do it. It's where the best knowledge lives. Like if you're interested in layout builder, tomorrow about 1 or 2, there is a talk, and the guy that is doing it is pretty much Chris van der Waters, who is the guy that did it, that developed that. So he will know what you need, the questions that you have. He really knows the answer. And this is a reality for me. I met good Drupal developers like this guy all the time. They're good. They're really good. But only those that are involved in the community is those that I can really call great. Are the really ones that when they say, I'm going to do that, it's like, perfect, yeah, go. So that's it. As I said, it's a lot of concepts. I didn't want to go deep on any, but keep it in your mind, because as your project grows, as you plug into the community, you're going to listen, you're going to hear them again, and you're going to need to start preparing for those before it's too late. Thank you. Again, the name is Carlos Espina. I never said that at the beginning. That's my email. That's my Twitter. If you have any questions and comments, we have like 5 minutes. None? Yes, sir.
One question on the PHP-CS standards for Drupal.
Yes.
Maybe a little deeper than you were wanting to go, but does that go, I'm not familiar with Drupal standards there, does that incorporate maybe pair or some of the other coding standards for PHP?
Like what, sorry?
Like pair or any of the other standards for
yes. Yes, it's coming. Every PHP project comes from the PHP standard and adds whatever is preferred. Documentation on your code, stuff like that.
Okay, I'm curious what it would flag.
Yeah, you can find it on Drupal.org in coding standards. What makes it good is if you have code standards and you have a new developer that has been working in Drupal, he will know what is happening.
We use them, it's been years since we've touched the Drupal project, we've been over time, so we haven't.
And again, there are automatic tools. PHP Storm will fix it for you. Code Sniffer will stop. And actually, tools like Acquia BLT and some other tools, they use it nowadays. JS Lint, CSS Lint, all that exists.
Yeah, we use all those. It's the Drupal.
Yeah, and it basically stops your project like, no, that looks ugly. How you wrote that.
I've got a 5-blog series that I can send you that shows about various ways you can set to check your code standards.
I'm familiar with PHP-CS. It's not particular Drupal.
It's Drupal.
Is it
Drupal
Drupal?
8 code standards, because there's
Yes.
things you need to know with white space that
Sure.
are outside of PHP realm,
That's
and other things.
That's the kind of thing I was curious about.
Yeah, I'll send those to you. Let me get your email for it later.
Cool. Thank you.
Any other question? No? Too few information? Too much?
Good.
So that's how I jumpstart all my clients nowadays, and I learned with my old clients what we needed. So I hope it works, and thank you.